Handling powerful horses looks easy for these riders in Kazakhstan. Handling powerful neighbors is tougher. Kazakhstan is a country with vast steppes, a lot of resources, and a futuristic capital. Though you might only know it for the fictional character Borat. Kazakhstan is big, but its neighbors, Russia and China, are bigger. It's sandwiched between two nuclear powers. So how can Kazakhstan hold its ground in that neighborhood? Let's launch into some basics.
Named Yuri Gagarin.
The first human in space took off from the Kazakh steppe. Kazakhstan is about as big as a big chunk of Europe, though only around 20 million people live there, mostly in cities. The population is young, almost half is under 30. The Kazakh people used to be nomadic, and horses are still an important part of the national identity. The majority is Muslim, though the state is secular. And this is the president of the authoritarian state. Kazakhstan's geography has created a challenge for the country. It has resources, loads of uranium, oil and gas, lithium, and also critical minerals, the ones that everyone needs for mobile phones and other technology. Kazakhstan is in Central Asia along with these countries. It's only connected to the Caspian Sea and doesn't have access to the open ocean. It's actually the world's biggest landlocked country. That means it needs its neighbors to trade its resources. And Kazakhstan is marketing itself as a transit country for the region.
The idea of Kazakhstan being in the middle, connecting the East and the West, we see this gaining a greater place in the strategic branding and positioning of the country.
Aruzhan Mirkhanova is a Central Asia analyst in Kazakhstan with a focus on political economy.
This is not only about being landlocked, this is about what kind of neighbors you have, right? And the longest land border with Russia.
If there is an external threat that exists for Kazakhstan's stability, it would be from the north. It would be from Russia.
Timur Umarov is from Kazakhstan's neighbor, Uzbekistan. He focuses on Central Asia's relations with China and Russia.
Out of all neighbors that Kazakhstan has, only Russia has been waging two aggressive wars in the last decade.
Both Georgia and Ukraine were part of the Soviet Union, just like Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's long history of oppression and colonial rule from Moscow dates back to the Russian Empire, and Russian influence continued after the 1917 revolution. The Soviet government forced traditionally nomadic Kazakhs to settle. Joseph Stalin introduced a centralized farming policy. It caused one of the deadliest man-made famines of the 20th century, killing millions in the Soviet Union. At least 1.5 million people died in Kazakhstan. Soviet leaders also used the country's vast steppe to test nuclear bombs. And the Kazakh language was sidelined. To succeed, you needed to speak Russian.
They do not question.
The Soviet past and the Soviet heritage cannot be underestimated. The political elites that are now ruling the country, they all are rooted into the history of the Soviet Union.
Nursultan Nazarbayev was the last leader of Soviet Kazakhstan and the first president of independent Kazakhstan. He built himself a bunch of monuments in his 30 years in power. Nazarbayev kept ties with Russia close. Russia still uses Baikonur Cosmodrome for space launches. Kazakhstan became part of a bunch of post-Soviet and pretty much Russia-led clubs. The Collective Security Treaty Organization, a military alliance, and the Eurasian Economic Union, which aims to create a common market. Russia is still one of Kazakhstan's top trade partners.
The economic directions that Kazakhstan is developing upon, the infrastructure, the logistical ties that the country has, it all has been the heritage of the Soviet Union.
Kazakhstan is still dependent on Russia today. For example, when it comes to oil. A majority of Kazakhstan's oil is exported via this pipeline. So Russia controls Kazakhstan's main export route, and it has disrupted the flow of oil to Europe multiple times, a show of power. That's why Kazakhstan has been building alternatives to Russia, like this pipeline to China.
China, from the very beginning, has played the role of the main country that would be acting as a counterbalance to Russia's dominant positions.
The perfect example of that is the trade hub Horgoz on the Kazakh border with China. Kazakhstan, like Russia, still uses Soviet rail gauges, which are wider than the ones in China. In Horgoz, Chinese goods are transferred from one kind of rail line to another before they can travel on to Europe.
The idea of Belt and Road Initiative was unveiled by President Xi Jinping in Kazakhstan, which already, I think, testifies as to how important Kazakhstan is for Chinese vision of this Eurasian connectivity. And since then, the developments have evolved at a rapid pace.
As part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has been investing billions in Kazakhstan's infrastructure. The big picture here is the idea of a so-called middle corridor, a whole network of roads, railroads, and ports meant to connect China via Kazakhstan to Europe. That means better connections for landlocked Kazakhstan. And
for Kazakhstan, it's a source of transit revenues. Kazakhstan is now, I think, leveraging this momentum to actually attract more investment into the country's hard infrastructure.
China needs that infrastructure to trade the goods it produces. And a lot of those goods are shipped. But as the war in Iran has shown us, maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz can easily be blocked.
So China wants to have a backup plan, railways and different types of continental logistics that connects China to its main economic partner, European Union. And through Central Asia, through Kazakhstan, China can have this access without relying that much on the sea routes.
For China and also for Europe, the Middle Corridor is a potential alternative trade route to the Northern Corridor that goes via Russia. Just like those pipelines carrying Kazakh oil to Europe that Russia disrupted, transit through Russian territory seems even more unreliable since the Ukraine war. And that war has turned Kazakhstan's historically close but conflicted relationship with Russia into a balancing act. Kazakhstan's current president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, hasn't condemned Russia's war against Ukraine outright.
Мемлекеттердің территориялық тұтастығы міндетті түрде сақталу керек.
Tokayev's rhetoric on the war is cautious. Here's why. Right before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there were big anti-government protests in Kazakhstan. Russia sent military forces to help quash the unrest as part of that military alliance we mentioned earlier. So Putin helped prop up Tokayev's regime, which means Tokayev kind of owes Russia.
It is an interesting dilemma that Kazakhstan finds itself in. On the one hand, Russia is the main ally, is the country that can provide the regime security for Kazakhstan's authoritarian political regime, but at the same time, this is the source of a threat.
Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine started with the narrative of protecting the ethnic Russian and Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine. Kazakhstan also has an ethnic Russian population, which is around 15%. This is the share of ethnic Russians in each region. It's higher the closer you get to the Russian border.
As we have seen with other examples, Russia can use the Russian ethnic minorities around the world as an excuse to meddle into other countries' domestic affairs or as an excuse for anything more radical.
In public life, Russian is still a dominant language in Kazakhstan. But Kazakhstan has been trying to promote the Kazakh language. President Tokayev even spoke Kazakh when he hosted the Russian president. A baffled-looking Russian delegation had to turn to their translation devices before Tokayev switched back to Russian.
Kazakhstan wants to create more space between itself and Russia, but at the same time not to cross those sensitive red lines, the Russian language and the Russian ethnic population inside Kazakhstan.
And if you know about those red lines, even throwaway comments by Putin can sound like a warning.
Казахстан — это практически русскоговорящая страна. На мой взгляд, нужно делать все для того, чтобы укреплять наши связи.
Russia's understanding of its influence in post-Soviet space is that everything should be like it was in the past. Everybody should look up to Moscow, to wait for Moscow to make the most important decisions for Central Asian countries.
But Russia's old sphere of influence has been shaken by the war, and Russia is under Western sanctions. To get around those sanctions, Russia is buying Western goods via Kazakhstan. And Russia now depends on China. It's propping up Russia's wartime economy. A good moment for Kazakhstan to further deepen ties with China, because Russia can't really object to that.
There has been a level of partnership with China that has probably at its historic height, and I believe there's a personal aspect to it as well.
Because Kazakhstan's President Tokayev speaks fluent Mandarin. He can use that to win favor with Chinese officials. Xi Jinping initiated a new regular meetup with Kazakhstan and the other Central Asian states, with a lot of glam. And without Russia.
中亚国家主权、安全、独立、领土完整必须得到维护。
The backing that Kazakhstan has is now China. What Kazakhstan didn't want to do is to replace Russian monopolistic influence with Chinese. It needs both of them at the same time.
And it needs others. Many European Union countries are importing a huge amount of Kazakh oil to replace sanctioned Russian oil. And the US is pretty interested in Kazakhstan's critical minerals to replace Chinese ones. Kazakhstan says it discovered a huge store of them in this district in 2025. That find could mean Kazakhstan has the third biggest reserve of rare earth elements after China and Brazil. So resources are Kazakhstan's way to attract lots of different partners. But security is still an issue. Remember, Tokayev owes Russia. Russia sent some of the military forces that helped prop up his regime. And Russia is Kazakhstan's main arms supplier. It's important for other Central Asian countries too.
we should understand that the basis of those armies and militaries and equipment are also rooted into the Soviet Union, and it's only Russia that can provide those necessary modernization.
But Kazakhstan has had a low-key cooperation with NATO for decades, including joint exercises. And now it's turning to NATO member Turkey to modernize its military hardware. The two countries signed a deal to jointly produce drones.
So Kazakhstan wants to see as many partners to be present so that it can slowly and very carefully lower down the geopolitical standing that Russia has in its country.
So Kazakhstan wants to avoid having just one best friend, or even two, especially because you never know how long they'll get along. Kazakhstan wants as many partners as possible. There's even a name for what it's doing: multivector diplomacy.
And in geographic reality that Kazakhstan is in, that is really a necessity rather than a luxury, In such a tough, if I may use that word, neighborhood, and still maintaining good relations with all major powers is definitely an art of diplomacy.
As long as Kazakhstan has something to offer to lots of different players, it can stand its ground.